She called him because she was terrified. 7 months pregnant, alone, contractions tightening like a fist around her spine. Evelyn Ashcroft did what any wife would do. She called her husband. A woman answered, not a secretary, not a colleague, a woman with a slow, satisfied voice who said, "He's a little busy right now," and laughed before the line went dead. In that single moment, every lie Evelyn had refused to believe became the only truth she could hold. If you've ever loved someone who made you feel completely alone, stay with me. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. The contractions had started around 9:15. Evelyn knew the difference by now. She'd had 2 false alarms in the past month, nights where her body tightened and released in waves that felt terrifying but amounted to nothing more than what the OB called practice. She'd driven herself home from those appointments alone, sat in the parking garage for 10 minutes, convincing herself she was fine, and never once told Damien how frightened she'd been. That was the arrangement, unspoken but understood. She managed herself, and he managed everything else. But this was different. This wasn't tightening. This was pressure that moved, that had intention, that radiated from somewhere low in her back and wrapped itself around the front of her like a hand squeezing from the inside. She'd been standing at the kitchen counter when it started, one hand braced against the granite, the other pressing absently against the underside of her belly, where she'd felt their daughter kick only an hour before. The dinner she'd been heating up, leftover pasta, nothing special, the kind of meal you make when you've stopped pretending you're waiting for someone, sat forgotten on the stove. The smell of garlic filled the apartment. The rain had been hitting the windows for hours. She breathed through the first wave, counted to 8, exhaled. Then it came again before she'd even finished the count. She reached for her phone. His number was still at the top of her recent calls, which felt almost cruel. There it was, proof that she'd called him 3 times in the past 2 days, and each call had gone the same way. Voicemail. His voice, measured and controlled, telling her to leave a message. She had, once. Just said, "Damien, it's late. Call me back." He hadn't. She told herself he was in meetings. That was what Damien Vescari did. He had meetings that ran past midnight in rooms without windows, with men whose last names were never spoken aloud, about matters that he couldn't and wouldn't discuss with her. She had married him knowing this. Married him knowing that there were parts of his life she would never be handed a key to. And she had decided after a long, difficult year of trying to love a man who operated inside walls she couldn't scale, that the parts she did have access to were enough. She had believed that for 7 months, right up until tonight. She pressed call. It rang 4 times. She counted those too. Then someone answered. Not Damien. The voice on the other end was female, low and unhurried. The voice of someone who had nowhere to be and nothing to explain. There was the faint sound of music in the background, something instrumental, and what might have been a glass being set down on a hard surface. "Hello?" Evelyn's hand tightened on the phone. She said very carefully, "I'm calling for Damien." A pause. Just long enough. "He's a little busy right now." The woman's tone wasn't hostile. That was the worst part. It was almost bored, the way you'd speak to someone calling the wrong number. Polite enough to answer, not polite enough to pretend the situation was anything other than what it was. This is his wife. Evelyn said it without trembling, which surprised her. She didn't know where that steadiness came from. Somewhere deep and cold. "I need to speak with him. It's a medical emergency." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "He can't come to the phone." The line went dead. Evelyn stood in her kitchen for a long moment. The pasta was burning. She could smell it. She reached over and turned off the burner without looking, and then she set the phone down on the counter, very gently, the way you set something down when you're afraid of what you'll do if you let yourself feel how hard you want to throw it. The next contraction hit before she could think. She grabbed the counter with both hands and bent forward slightly, the way the nurse had showed her. Not because it helped, but because it gave her something to do with her body while her mind went very, very quiet. She breathed. She counted. She did not cry, because crying took energy she could not spare right now, and because some part of her had already crossed a threshold tonight where crying no longer felt like the right language for what she was feeling. She called her OB. Dr. Miriam Howell answered on the second ring, which was one of the reasons Evelyn had chosen her. She answered. Even at 9:40 on a rainy Tuesday, she answered, "Evelyn, talk to me." Contractions. They're close. 7, maybe 8 minutes apart. I've had 3 in the last 22 minutes. How long have they been building? Since 9:15, maybe earlier. I thought it was nothing. Are you alone? The word landed differently than it should have. Alone. As if it were an unusual condition. As if Dr. Howell had fully expected there to be a husband standing in the kitchen with Evelyn, car keys already in hand, coat already on. Yes, Evelyn said. I'll call a car. Don't wait. Go now. I'll meet you at Northwestern. She didn't pack a bag. There was a bag. She'd packed it at 32 weeks, the way the book said, everything folded neatly inside a soft gray duffel that sat on the shelf in the closet. But she didn't get it. She grabbed her coat off the chair, her wallet from the counter, her phone, and she walked out of the apartment without looking back at the burned pasta, the rain-streaked windows, the half-assembled crib in the second bedroom that Damien had started assembling 3 weeks ago and then been called away before he finished. The car arrived in 4 minutes. The driver, a heavy-set man in his 50s who smelled like coffee and pine air freshener, took one look at her in the rear-view mirror and said nothing, which was the right call. He drove fast. She sat in the back seat with one hand pressed flat against the side of her belly and watched the Chicago skyline blur past in the rain. She did not call Damien again. That decision surprised her too. Damien Viscari was not, as the woman had suggested, busy. He was in a meeting. That part was accurate, but not the kind the woman's voice had implied. He was in the back room of a restaurant on the north side called Sorrento's that he'd owned through a series of shell companies for 11 years, sitting across a scarred oak table from a man named Caruso, who owed him $400,000 and had been making increasingly creative excuses for the past 6 weeks. There were 2 other men in the room. Nobody was relaxed. His phone was on the table, face down. He turned it face down an hour ago, not because he was hiding anything, but because 3 notifications in 40 minutes from a name he hadn't recognized had made Caruso nervous. And nervous men in back rooms were dangerous men, and Damien had not survived 38 years in this business by letting variables stack up in the wrong direction. When Caruso finally left, a deal struck, a deadline agreed upon, the kind of negotiation that looked nothing like what movies suggested, and everything like 2 men who understood consequences discussing them without sentimentality. Damien's second-in-command, a lean, quiet man named Gio, who'd been with him for 12 years, leaned against the doorframe and said, "There was something from your phone earlier." Gio saw the screen when it lit up. He said it was Evelyn's number. Damien picked up the phone. 3 missed calls. Evelyn. Then a 4th, the number he didn't recognize, but same timestamp cluster. He felt something move in his chest that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite dread, but was the particular feeling of a man who has made a series of small, compounding mistakes and has just realized the bill has come due. He called her back. Voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He looked at Gio. "Get the car." "There's still the thing with Marcello at—" "Get the car, Gio." He was already moving toward the door. What Damien didn't know, what he wouldn't know until later, when the full weight of it found him, was that his phone had been in someone else's hands. Her name was Renata. She was 31. She worked nominally in acquisitions for one of Damien's legitimate business arms, and she had existed at the margin of his life for 8 months in the way that things exist at the margin of a powerful man's life. Noticed, indulged, not examined too closely. He hadn't loved her. He wasn't sure he'd ever pretended to. What she represented was something more corrosive than love. She was the evidence that Damien Viscari had not yet decided to be the man his wife believed she'd married. He'd been in a separate room when Evelyn called. Renata had seen the name on the screen. She'd answered. He didn't know this yet. He found out piece by piece over the next 3 hours. First from Gio, who'd heard her on the phone from the hallway and said nothing because it wasn't his business. Then from Renata herself, who told him with a composure that he found more disturbing than anger would have been, as though she'd calculated the risk and decided it was acceptable. She called. I answered. I told her you couldn't come to the phone. Damien stood very still. She said she was having a medical emergency. He watched her face for something. Remorse, panic, the smallest evidence that she understood what she had done. He found nothing that qualified. She said she was your wife, Renata continued, and the way she said wife, like a category of thing that existed in a document somewhere, functionally, legally, but not here in this room, not in any way that mattered, made something close in Damien's chest. He said only one thing. Get out of my house. Don't come back. Then he was moving, past her, past Gio, out through the marble foyer and down to the street where his car was waiting, the rain hitting the pavement in sheets so thick they looked solid. The drive to Northwestern Memorial took 19 minutes in traffic that had no business being as heavy as it was at 10:30 on a Tuesday night in a rainstorm. Damien sat in the back seat and called Evelyn 4 more times. Voicemail every time. He called the hospital directly and was told by a woman who was professionally pleasant and completely immovable that patient information could not be confirmed or denied over the phone without verification of relationship, and that if he was the patient's spouse, he was welcome to come to the maternity ward in person. I'm on my way, he said. He stared out the window and watched the city move past in the rain and thought, with a specificity and clarity that felt almost punishing, about every moment in the past 8 months where he had made a choice that had led to this car, this drive, this particular quality of terror. He was not a man who frightened easily. He had built his life, the visible parts and the invisible parts, on a capacity for steadiness that most people would have called coldness. He'd sat across from men with weapons. He'd made decisions that cost people things they couldn't recover. He had learned, very young, that emotion was something you managed after the fact, not during, because during was when it could get you killed. None of that prepared him for this. There was nothing to negotiate here. No leverage, no exit strategy, no version of this situation that he could engineer into a better outcome with the right conversation. Evelyn was in a hospital, and he didn't know why, and he had done this. Not Renata. Renata had lit the match, but he had spent 8 months building the pile. The car pulled up to the hospital entrance. He was out the door before it fully stopped. She was in triage when he arrived. He'd given his name at the desk and been told to wait, and he had, for approximately 45 seconds, before the look on his face convinced the charge nurse that waiting was going to require a physical intervention she wasn't staffed for tonight. She'd taken him back. The curtain was half drawn. He could hear Dr. Howell's voice before he could see Evelyn, low, measured, explaining something about monitoring and stress hormones and cervical dilation, the vocabulary of a crisis being professionally managed. He pushed through the curtain. Evelyn was lying propped up in the hospital bed, monitors attached, the pale blue gown making her look smaller than she was. Her hair was pulled back badly. She'd done it herself. In the car, probably, the way you do something fast when there's no one to help you. There were no tears on her face. That was the first thing he noticed, and it told him everything he needed to know about where she was right now, past the kind of pain that cries, into the kind that goes quiet and hard. She looked at him. Dr. Howell turned, registered his presence, and had the practiced tact to say, "I'll give you a few minutes," and slip out. The room was very quiet. The monitors beeped. Outside the window, the rain came down. Damien crossed the room. He sat down in the chair beside the bed. He did not reach for her hand because some instinct told him that would be the wrong move, that the wrong move right now could close a door that he might never get open again. He said, "I didn't know she answered." Evelyn's eyes held steady on him. Her voice, when it came, was so controlled it sounded rehearsed. There was a she to answer. He didn't try to explain that away. "Yes," he said. "How long?" It wasn't a question. She already knew. He could see that. She was giving him the chance to tell the truth instead of making her drag it out of him, and they both understood what he chose right now mattered more than what he said. 8 months, he said. She turned her face away from him, toward the window, toward the rain. The muscle in her jaw tightened once, and then released like something closing. "I called you," she said, "because I was scared. Because I didn't know what was happening, and the contractions wouldn't stop, and she's 7 months along, and I was alone in the kitchen, and I—" She stopped. Her hand went to the side of her belly, the same unconscious gesture she'd been making for months now, the way you reach for the thing you're most afraid of losing. "And a woman answered your phone," she finished, "and told me you were busy." Damien said nothing. There was nothing that would help. "Damien." She finally looked back at him. Her eyes were dry and absolutely clear. "I want you to leave." He didn't move. "The baby is being monitored. The doctor says the contractions are slowing. I'm not in labor. I'm going to be here overnight, and then I'm going home, and I need you to leave." "Evelyn, don't." The single word landed flat and hard. "Whatever you're about to say, don't. Because if you say the wrong thing right now, I will never be able to unhear it, and I am trying—" Her voice caught, just once, just a fraction. "I am trying very hard to make decisions tonight that I don't regret." He stood up slowly. He looked at her for a long moment, at the monitors, at the curve of her belly under the thin hospital blanket, at the woman he had married 3 years ago in a courthouse in the rain because she had laughed at something he said, and he had understood, in that moment, that he wanted to be the person who made her laugh like that for the rest of his life. He had not been that person for a very long time. "Okay," he said. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the curtain. "I'll be outside." She didn't respond. He walked out through the triage area and down the corridor and found a waiting room with a row of plastic chairs and a window that looked out over the parking structure, rain running in rivers down the glass. And he sat down in the chair closest to the window, and he did not move, because outside was still closer than gone. And somewhere in that hospital, his daughter was fighting to stay inside her mother's body for 2 more months, and his wife was lying in a bed making decisions about her future that he had no right to influence. And Damien Viscari, who had walked into rooms that ended careers, whose name made certain men go pale, who had never in his adult life felt genuinely powerless, sat in a plastic chair at 11:47 on a Tuesday night in a hospital waiting room in Chicago and understood, for the very first time, exactly how much he had to lose. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. "Gio, the Renata situation. There's something you need to know." She didn't just answer the phone. Damien stared at the screen for a long time. Then he typed back, "Tomorrow." He put the phone in his pocket and looked out at the rain, and something dark and cold settled into his chest. Not grief, not yet, but the specific weight of a man who has done real damage and is only beginning to understand how far it reaches. In a room 2 floors above him, Evelyn Ashcroft lay very still in the dark, one hand resting on the side of her belly, listening to her daughter's heartbeat on the monitor. Steady, stubborn, determined to exist. And outside her window, past the rain and the parking structure and the yellow lights of the city that didn't care about any of this, the world continued moving forward. It always does, whether you're ready or not. The waiting room smelled like industrial cleaner and burnt coffee, and the particular kind of exhaustion that only hospitals manufacture, the kind that has nothing to do with the hour and everything to do with what you're waiting for. Damien hadn't moved from the plastic chair in 40 minutes. He'd watched the night staff rotate past the doorway in 1s and 2s. He'd watched a man in his 60s fall asleep across 3 chairs with a jacket over his face. He'd watched the rain work its way down the glass in patterns that didn't repeat. And he'd thought about Gio's text. And he'd thought about Renata. And mostly he'd thought about Evelyn's face when she told him to leave. Not the anger in it, because there hadn't been anger, not exactly. And that was what kept turning in him like something with a sharp edge. There'd been something worse than anger. There'd been the look of a woman who had finished being surprised. He pulled out his phone at 12:20 and called Gio. It rang once. "Boss?" "Tell me." A pause. The sound of Gio moving somewhere. A door closing. The ambient noise of wherever he was dropping away. "The phone thing wasn't the first time," Gio said. "Renata. She's been doing things, small things for a while. I didn't know if it was my place." "What kind of things?" "The schedule. Your schedule. She had access to it through the acquisition system. Who knew when you'd be where? There were a couple of times, last month and the month before, where Evelyn showed up at places, the restaurant on Erie, the thing at the hotel, and you weren't there. You got rerouted at the last minute." Damien's hand was very still on the phone. "Rerouted by who?" The calendar updates came through the acquisitions channel. Her channel. The fluorescent light above him buzzed once, faintly, then steadied. "So she was keeping them apart," Damien said. "I think she'd been doing it for a while. I don't know how long. I should have looked harder. I'm sorry." Damien didn't say anything for a moment. He was doing the math, not the emotional math. Not yet. That would come later, and it would be brutal when it did. But the practical math, the timeline math, counting backwards through months of missed dinners and rerouted calls, and a marriage that had been quietly, methodically dismantled from the inside by a woman who understood that you didn't need to break something if you could simply keep two people from ever being in the same room long enough to hold it together. Does she know you know? He asked. No. Keep it that way. I want everything. Every calendar change, every rerouted message, every time her hands were on anything that touched my wife. I want a document I can hold. By when? Yesterday. He hung up. He sat with the information for a while, letting it find its shape in him. The rage was there. He could feel it low and dense, but he'd been managing rage since he was 19 years old, and he knew better than to let it move before he understood what he was moving toward. Renata had not invented the affair. He had to be very clear about that with himself. She had constructed the walls around it, yes, kept it contained, kept Evelyn at the periphery, manufactured the distance that had let the whole thing breathe. But he had built the original sin himself, and no amount of anger at her maneuvering changed the square footage of what he owed. He put his phone back in his pocket and looked at his watch. 12:34. He was still there when the first light of morning came gray and watery through the parking structure windows. Evelyn was discharged at 9:15 the following morning. Dr. Howell had spent an hour with her, going through the results with the careful, unhurried specificity that Evelyn had always valued in her. No softening, no euphemism, just information and options and what the numbers meant. The contractions had stopped responding to stress markers around 3 in the morning. The baby's heart rate had stabilized. Cervical length was within safe range. But the stress hormones in Evelyn's blood work were elevated in a way that Dr. Howell described, in a tone that allowed no argument as not something we can keep ignoring. What does that mean in practical terms? Evelyn said. It means your body has been managing a sustained stress load for long enough that it's starting to show up in measurable ways. The contractions last night weren't random. They were a response. Your system is telling you something. I understand what stress is, Miriam. I know you do. Dr. Howell folded her hands on the clipboard. I'm telling you that at 30 weeks, your daughter is telling you too, and she doesn't have a choice in how she communicates. Evelyn looked at the window. The rain had stopped. The sky was the flat white of a city morning after a storm, everything washed clean and slightly raw-looking. Modified bed rest, Dr. Howell continued, not full. I'm not asking you to stop moving, but I am asking you to stop carrying everything alone. Is there someone? Yes, Evelyn said. There's someone. She didn't specify who. He was in the lobby. She saw him before he saw her. He was standing near the far windows with a paper coffee cup in each hand and a look on his face that she recognized from the early days of knowing him, before the walls went up all the way, when he didn't yet know how to hide things from her. Tired wasn't the word. He looked like a man who'd been dragged a long distance over rough ground and had come out the other side still standing through nothing but stubbornness. He looked up and saw her. He didn't move toward her. He waited. She crossed the lobby. She took one of the coffees without asking which one was meant for her because she didn't actually believe both cups were for him. She'd known him long enough to know that. She drank. It was black and too hot, and she didn't care. You stayed, she said. Yes? I told you to leave. You told me to leave the room, he said. I left the room. She studied him for a moment. The suit he'd been wearing last night was wrinkled in the particular way of a suit that's been slept in, or tried to be slept in a plastic chair. His jaw was dark with a night's growth. His eyes were clear, though, and that was the thing about Damien that had always disoriented her. No matter how wrecked the rest of him looked, his eyes stayed sharp, stayed present, and she'd never been able to decide if that was a strength or something she should have run from. The doctor put me on modified rest, she said. I heard. You shouldn't have heard anything. Patient privacy. I didn't hear details. I heard modified rest because Dr. Howell walked through the lobby and I asked her if you were okay and she said you were stable and going to need modifications. That's all. Evelyn looked at him. You talked to my doctor. I asked one question. Damien, I was in the building. His voice didn't rise, didn't shift. I was going to ask. I will always ask. She turned and walked toward the exit doors, and he fell into step beside her without being invited, which was both infuriating and, she recognized with an honesty that cost her something, steadying. The cold morning air hit them both when the doors opened. That particular November quality of Chicago cold that got into the seams of things. And she pulled her coat tighter and stood at the top of the steps looking at the street below. His car was at the curb. Of course it was. "I'll get a car," she said. "Or you could let me take you home." "We're not doing this." "I'm not trying to do anything except drive you home. You were in the hospital last night. You're on medical restrictions. Let me drive you home, and then I'll go." She looked at the street for a moment, at the ordinary Tuesday morning rhythm of the city, cabs and cyclists, and a woman walking a small dog that was wearing a yellow raincoat. The world operating completely without regard for what had happened inside this building last night. "Fine," she said. The drive took 12 minutes. They didn't speak for 11 of them. She watched the city move past the window and felt the particular hollowness of the morning after. Not grief, not yet, but the echo chamber quality of the hours after something fundamental has changed, when you can still feel the shape of what the world was before, even though it's already gone. "Her name," Evelyn said. Damien kept his eyes on the road. "Renata." "How long?" 8 months. He'd said it last night, and he said it the same way now, without inflation or softening, and she didn't know if that made it easier or harder. "It's done. I ended it last night. She's gone." "Don't." She turned to look at him. "Don't frame it like you did something. You ended it because you got caught. That's not a sacrifice. That's just consequence." He was quiet for a moment. "You're right. I know I am." The car stopped in front of her building. Neither of them moved. "There's more," he said. She felt something tighten in her chest, something that had been braced all night and was now being asked to brace a little harder. "What more?" "She had access to my scheduling system. Geo thinks, and I'm still verifying, that some of the times we missed each other this past year, dinners I didn't show up to, events where you got there and that wasn't all me. She was rerouting things." Evelyn stared at him. "So now it's her fault," she said very quietly. "No." He turned to look at her then, and whatever she'd been expecting to see, defensiveness, calculation, the usual architecture of a man trying to manage a conversation, wasn't there. What was there was worse. What was there was just truth, the flat and terrible kind. "It's not her fault. It's my fault for letting her close enough to do it. Everything that exists for her to manipulate. Every night I wasn't home, every call I didn't answer, every version of our marriage that had gaps in it, I made those. I'm not telling you this to move the blame. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the full picture." Minutes. Evelyn didn't say anything. "There are things you thought were me choosing not to show up," he said. "That might have been something else. That's all I'm saying. I need to give you that." She looked at her hands in her lap for a long moment, and Damien watched her, and neither of them said anything about the fact that her hands were trembling. Not much, just barely, the kind of tremor that comes not from cold, but from the effort of containing something too large for the available space. She opened the car door. "Thank you for the ride," she said. "Evelyn." She was already on the sidewalk, already moving, and she did not look back because looking back required a kind of energy she didn't have yet, and because some decisions have to be made in stages, and today was not the day for the next stage. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it the night before. That was the part that broke something loose in her. Not the absence of him, not the monitors or the hospital, or the morning light on the burned pasta still sitting cold on the stove, but the specific and mundane evidence that the world had just kept going while she was lying in a hospital bed alone, that nothing in here had noticed or cared. The pasta had burned. The coat hook by the door was empty. The half-assembled crib stood in the second bedroom with one side still unattached, a screwdriver lying on the carpet next to it like a punctuation mark. She stood in the doorway of that room for a long time. Then she called her younger sister. Kara picked up on the first ring, which meant she'd been awake, which meant she'd already heard something. She always heard things first, always had. It was the particular talent of people who paid attention. "Ev?" "I need someone to come over," Evelyn said. "Not to talk, just to be here." "I'm already getting my keys," Kara said. Kara arrived 20 minutes later with 2 bags, groceries in one, an overnight duffel in the other, and the look of a woman who had already made a series of decisions before she walked in the door. She was 31, 5 years younger than Evelyn, and where Evelyn was architecture, precise, and load-bearing, Kara was weather, changeable, present, impossible to ignore. She took one look at the kitchen and cleaned up the burned pasta without comment. She put groceries away. She made actual food, eggs, toast, the kind of breakfast that required no decisions from the person eating it, and put it in front of Evelyn at the kitchen table with a coffee and said nothing, which was the correct thing to say. Evelyn ate. After a while, Kara sat down across from her with her own cup and said, "Tell me what you need." "I don't know yet. Okay? I don't want to make any decisions right now that I can't unmake." Smart. He says she was manipulating the schedule, keeping us apart, engineering distance. Kara's expression didn't shift. "Do you believe him?" "I don't know. Maybe. It doesn't change the base fact." "No," Kara said. "It doesn't." "But it changes the—" Evelyn stopped, pressed her fingers against her mouth for a moment. The baby moved, a slow roll, an elbow or a knee shifting, and Evelyn's hand went automatically to her side. "It changes the texture of it. That's the part I can't figure out yet. Whether that matters." Kara watched her sister's hand on the side of her belly and said nothing for a while. "He's still Damien," she finally said. Not as a defense, more like a fact that needs to be located before you can decide what to do with it. "I know. Which means he's going to want to fix it, and he's going to think he can." "I know that too." "And you're going to have to decide whether you want him trying." Evelyn looked out the kitchen window at the gray November sky. "Not today," she said. "Okay," Kara said. "Not today." What Damien did that afternoon, and the 3 days after, was this. Nothing visible. He did not call. He did not come to the door. He did not send flowers, which he knew she'd have thrown in the hallway, or messages through Geo, which she'd have ignored. He did not try to explain himself through intermediaries or arrange for mutual friends, what few they had, to carry his case for him. What he did, invisibly, was this. He called the hospital billing department and settled the overnight stay before the invoice was generated. He arranged, through a property management company with no obvious connection to him, to have the security in Evelyn's building upgraded. Better cameras, a second access point locked after 9 p.m., a night attendant added to the desk. He called Dr. Howell's office, identified himself, and arranged for any and all medical costs related to his wife's pregnancy to be routed to an account managed by his attorney. He did not tell Evelyn any of this. He understood, with a clarity that was new to him and not entirely comfortable, that telling her would transform these things into transactions, would make them about his need to be seen doing them rather than about what she needed. He was not ready to be that honest with himself about all his motives yet, but he was honest enough to know that this particular instinct was correct. He dealt with Renata on the second day. She came to the meeting, a conference room in one of his legitimate properties, daylight, attorneys present on both sides, with the composure of someone who had prepared for this and decided they had nothing to be afraid of. She was wrong about that, but not in the way she'd have feared. Damien had no interest in threatening her. He had an interest in information, what she'd done, how long, through which systems, and whether anyone else in his organization had been involved. She gave him less than he wanted and more than she intended. The calendar manipulations had begun at month 4 of their relationship, not, as he'd assumed, as a power grab, but because she'd become, in her own words, invested, which was the cleanest euphemism he'd heard in years for something that was really just a person deciding that someone else's life was theirs to architect. She hadn't thought of it as sabotage. She'd thought of it as management. The distinction said more about her than any admission would have. He let the attorneys handle the rest. The acquisition contract terminated, NDA enforced, severance arranged. Clean, legal, surgical. He walked out of the building into the cold and stood on the sidewalk for a moment and felt, not better exactly, but something more like one piece of the wreckage accounted for. One piece, out of several. He called his attorney from the car. "The therapy thing," he said. "Dr. Solis, I have a contact." "Set it up." A pause. "When?" "This week," Damien said. "As soon as she can take me." On the 4th day, Evelyn called him. He was at his desk when the call came, his actual desk, in the offices of his legitimate holdings on Michigan Avenue, doing the kind of work that he'd been increasingly handing off over the past year, but was now pulling back because he needed something to do with his hands and his mind that wasn't just the inside of his own skull. He picked up on the second ring. "The crib," she said without preamble. "There's a screwdriver on the floor of the second bedroom and one side isn't attached, and I looked at the instructions for 20 minutes and I cannot—" She stopped. He heard her exhale. "I need someone to finish the crib." He was very careful with the next 4 seconds. "I can come do it," he said. "I'm not asking for a conversation." "I know. You come, you finish the crib, you go." "Understood." "Damien." Her voice dropped a fraction. "Don't make it into something it isn't." "I won't." He was there in 35 minutes. She let him in and went to the kitchen and sat at the table with a book she didn't read. And he went to the second bedroom and finished the crib. It took about 40 minutes. The instructions were badly translated from whatever language they'd originated in, and one of the bolts was stripped and required a workaround that involved a different tool from the kit. He did it quietly. He didn't ask her for anything. When he was done, he stood in the doorway of the second bedroom and looked at what they'd built. What he'd built, technically, with her deciding on every element: the white painted wood, the mobile with the small pale moons hanging above it, the soft gray rug on the floor that she'd picked out 4 months ago during a weekend that had been, now that he was looking back at it with new eyes, one of the last good weekends. He walked to the front door and put his coat on. "It's done," he said. She looked up from the book. "Thank you." He nodded. He opened the door. He was 3 steps into the hallway when her voice came, quiet and uneven, through the open door behind him. "The medical bills. I got a notification that the balance was 0. That was you." He turned. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, one hand on the frame. Her expression was not softened. If anything, it was harder. The hardness of someone trying to hold a position when the ground is shifting under them. "Damien, I need you to not—" She stopped, started again. "I need to be able to be angry at you, and you keep doing things that make it complicated. So I need you to stop." He looked at her for a long moment. "I can't stop," he said simply. "I'm not doing it to complicate anything. I'm doing it because you're carrying my daughter and you're alone and you were in a hospital 4 nights ago, and I cannot act like those things aren't true. I'm not asking you to forgive anything, but I'm also not going to stop being here." She looked at him. The silence stretched long enough to have weight. "Then you should know," she said very quietly, "that Dr. Howell wants me to reduce stress. She says the elevated hormones are a risk. She wants me to remove sources of sustained emotional conflict." He understood what she was telling him. "And I'm a source," he said. "Right now," she said, "you're the source." Something moved through him. Not pain exactly, because he'd braced for this. He'd known somewhere in the back of everything that this conversation was coming. But the specific and irrevocable feeling of a man who has arrived at the moment he cannot walk back through. "What are you asking me to do?" he said. "I'm not asking you to disappear," Evelyn said. "I'm asking you to give me distance, real distance. Not you hovering invisibly distance, actual room to breathe without waiting to see what you're going to do next." "For how long?" She looked at him, and in her eyes was something that had not been there even 4 days ago. Not closure, not decision, but the specific exhaustion of a woman who has realized that she has been managing someone else's emotional architecture for so long that she has stopped building her own. "I don't know yet," she said. "That's part of the answer." He put his hand on the doorframe. He looked down the hallway, at the elevator at the end, at the exit sign above it, at the ordinary and indifferent geometry of a building that did not care about any of this. "Okay," he said, for the second time in 5 days. The word felt different now, heavier, like something being laid down at the foot of a wall he could not see the top of. He stepped into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind him, and he stood there for a moment in the quiet of the corridor alone. And he thought about what Gio had said, and what Dr. Solis had said in their first session 2 days ago. That the hardest work is not the grand gesture, but the sustained one. Not the apology, but the 1,000 daily choices after it. And he thought about his daughter in a crib he'd just finished building in a room he was no longer welcome to stand in. He pushed the elevator button. The doors opened. He stepped inside. And then his phone lit up. Not Geo, not his attorney, not anyone connected to the careful dismantling he'd been doing all week, but a name he hadn't seen in 6 months. Marcus Falco. A name from the part of his world that didn't involve conference rooms or legitimate offices or attorneys. A name that meant the other half of his life had not, despite everything, agreed to wait while he sorted through the wreckage of this one. The text was 4 words. We need to talk. And below it, a second message, arriving as the elevator doors slid closed around him. It's about Evelyn. The elevator doors closed, and Damien stood inside the small mirrored box and read Marcus Falco's text again. It's about Evelyn. 4 words, 8 syllables. The kind of sentence that doesn't explain itself because it doesn't have to. The weight is in the name, in whose name it is, in the fact that Marcus Falco, who had not contacted him in 6 months, and whose silence had been, until this moment, something Damien had chosen to interpret as the natural distance between 2 men who'd moved in different directions, had broken that silence with this specific combination of words and not any other. He pressed the lobby button. Then he pressed it again, which accomplished nothing, but his thumb needed somewhere to go. He called Marcus before the doors opened. It rang 3 times. Not on the phone, Marcus said, and hung up. They met at a place called the Anchor. Not a restaurant, not quite a bar, something in between that occupied the ground floor of a building in Pilsen that had been a textile factory in a previous life and still smelled faintly of machine oil underneath the food smells. Marcus had chosen it, which meant Marcus had been thinking about where to have this conversation before he sent the text, which meant this wasn't impulsive, which meant Damien needed to be very careful about everything, including his own reactions. Marcus Falco was 54 years old and looked it in the way that men who've spent decades in difficult rooms look it, not aged so much as compressed, every year of it visible in the set of his jaw and the way he held a coffee cup like it might try to leave. He and Damien had history going back to Damien's early 20s, the kind of history that doesn't get discussed in specifics, but that creates a specific quality of obligation between 2 men. He was not, technically, part of Damien's organization. He operated in adjacent territory, handled different kinds of problems, answered to different people, some of whom Damien knew, and some of whom he'd made a point of not knowing. He was already seated when Damien arrived. There was a coffee on the table and a second cup across from it, waiting. Damien sat. He did not touch the coffee. Talk, he said. Marcus looked at him for a moment, not stalling, just reading, the way he always did before he said anything significant, like he was making a final calculation. Vincent Caruso, he said. The name landed differently than it should have. Caruso. The man from the restaurant, the $400,000. The meeting 6 nights ago where everything had been resolved, the deal struck, the deadline agreed upon. That Caruso. What about him? Damien said. The deal you made last week. The payment arrangement. What about it? He's not going to honor it. Marcus turned the coffee cup a quarter turn on the table. He was never going to honor it. The meeting, the agreement, the whole performance, it was a stall. He needed you out of that room thinking the problem was managed, so you'd stop looking at him. Why would he need me not looking at him? Marcus looked at him steadily. Because he's been talking to people who have a specific interest in your current situation, your domestic situation. The room was not loud, but it suddenly felt very quiet. Say the rest of it, Damien said. There's a man. You don't know him directly. He's 3 steps removed. He runs money through Caruso's operation, named Feld. Anton Feld. He's been building a case, not a legal case. The other kind. Marcus paused. He wants your North Side interests. He's been watching your organization for weak points for about a year, and the weak point he landed on, the one he's been developing, is the fact that you have a pregnant wife living alone in an unsecured building who you've recently been separated from, under circumstances that your people know about, and his people now also know about. Damien's hand was on the table, very flat, very still. He's been using Caruso as a feeder, Marcus continued. Caruso feeds him information about your scheduling, your vulnerabilities, your attention. And what Caruso told him after last week's meeting is that your attention is divided, that you're managing a personal crisis, that you're going to therapy. Marcus said the word without inflection, but Damien heard it land the way it would land in the circles Feld operated in, like a diagnosis. And that your wife is a source of leverage you've effectively handed to anyone willing to pick it up. Damien said nothing. He was doing something that looked like sitting still, but was actually the internal process of a man reorganizing everything he thought he understood about the past 2 weeks. "How do you know this?" he said finally. "Because Feld approached one of my people 6 weeks ago. He was looking for additional information about Evelyn, specifically about her medical situation, her routine, her building security setup." The word security hit something cold in Damien's chest. He thought about the upgrades he'd arranged through the property management company. He thought about how recently he'd arranged them. "What did your person give him?" Damien said. "Nothing usable. I shut it down when I found out. I didn't contact you then because I wasn't sure of the scope yet, and I didn't want to bring you a half picture." Marcus picked up his coffee. "I'm bringing you the full picture now." "Why now?" "Because 3 days ago, Feld moved from information gathering to the next phase. He has someone on the inside of your wife's building." The fluorescent light above the table hummed. Somewhere in the kitchen, something metallic was dropped and clattered and was picked up. A completely ordinary sound. "Who?" Damien said. "The night attendant, the one added to the desk about a week ago. He came through a staffing agency. The agency has a paper trail that goes, if you pull it carefully, back to a property management company that Feld uses as a shell." Damien looked at Marcus for a long moment without speaking. Then he understood. The property management company. His property management company, the one he'd used to arrange the security upgrades anonymously, the one he'd chosen specifically because it had no visible connection to him. He'd used it because it was clean. He'd used it because he wanted the upgrades to happen without Evelyn knowing they came from him. And Feld had known he would use it. Feld had watched him use it. And Feld had used the same invisible channel, or one running parallel to it, to put his own man inside the building at the same moment. Which meant that the security upgrade Damien had installed to protect Evelyn had been built around a person Feld controlled. "He didn't just compromise the building," Damien said slowly. "He used my own move to do it." "Yes," Marcus said. "He was watching me closely enough to know what I'd do and time it." "Yes." Damien stood up from the table. He did not knock anything over. He did not raise his voice. He crossed to the window that looked out onto the street. An ordinary November street. A woman pushing a stroller, a delivery truck double parked, a kid on a bicycle navigating between them. And he stood with his back to the room, and he breathed very carefully, in and out, the way he'd been taught to do in situations where the wrong reaction could cost him everything. The irony of it was almost clean in its brutality. He had spent 2 weeks trying to become a better version of himself. He had ended the affair. He had fired the woman who had manipulated his life. He had gone to therapy. He had arranged protections for Evelyn without asking for credit. He had respected her request for distance. He had done every single thing that the revised, accountable version of Damien Viscari was supposed to do. And while he was doing all of that, a man he'd dismissed as a minor financial problem had been building a structure around his most vulnerable point with the patience and precision of someone who understood that the best time to move against a powerful man is when he's looking inward. He turned back to the table. "What does Feld actually want?" he said. "The endgame. The North Side portfolio. Specifically the 3 commercial properties on Halstead that run the legitimate money. He can't take them by force. You're too established. So the play is pressure. Make your personal situation unstable enough that you either make mistakes or you make deals you wouldn't otherwise make just to get the threat away from your family. And if I don't deal..." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "The man in the building," he said. "He's not there to hurt anyone. Right now. He's there to watch, to report, to be available for the next phase if the pressure play doesn't work." He paused. "I don't think Feld wants to go further than that. But Feld is also not the only person in his organization making decisions." Damien looked at his hands. "I need the man's name," he said. "The one in the building. Tomas Vara. Goes by Tom. Mid-30s, brown hair. He's been working the desk midnight to 8. I need him gone tonight." "I can make a call," Marcus said. "But Damien, if you pull the piece out of the board, Feld knows you know, and then the timetable accelerates. I can't leave him there." "No," Marcus agreed. "You can't." He called Gio from the car. "Vara, Tomas Vara. He's on the night desk at Evelyn's building. I want him removed from that position tonight. Not confronted, not detained, just gone. Contact the building management directly. Anonymous complaint about the staffing agency. Let the building's own HR process handle it. Clean. Understood. Then I want everything on Anton Feld. Everything. By morning. I'll start now. And Geo. Damien paused. The car moved through the mid-afternoon traffic, the gray city sliding past. The Caruso situation. He was a plant. A distraction. A beat of silence. I should have seen that. So should I. What do you want to do with him? Nothing yet. He thinks he's still invisible. I want him to keep thinking that. He hung up and sat back and looked at the ceiling of the car, which was beige and unremarkable, and absolutely the wrong thing to be looking at right now. But he needed to look at something that wasn't the situation for 30 seconds, or everything he was managing was going to get very loud very fast. He thought about Evelyn. She was in that building right now, 30 weeks pregnant, on modified rest, with a man connected to Anton Feld working the night desk. She didn't know. She was sitting in her apartment reading or talking to her sister or lying down with her hand on the side of her belly, doing the careful and difficult work of managing her own body and her own grief. And she had no idea that the perimeter of her life had been quietly compromised while her husband was busy doing penance. He had to tell her. He turned that over for a moment, looking for another angle, and found there wasn't one. He could remove Vera, yes. He could start moving against Feld through channels that Evelyn would never see. He could manage this the way he'd managed everything for 20 years. From behind the glass, invisible, effective, and completely alone in the knowledge of what he was doing and why. But she'd asked him for honesty. She'd asked him, in the plainest terms she had, to stop being the kind of man who managed things without telling her, and he'd agreed. And the agreement was either real or it was the same performance Renata had accused him of without knowing the word for it. He pressed the intercom. Take me to Evelyn's building. She opened the door in sweatpants and a maternity top that had a small paint stain on the hem from something she'd been doing to the nursery wall. Not paint, closer to chalk, the kind you use to write quotes on chalkboard panels. And she'd been working on something above the crib when the buzzer sounded. She looked at him with the expression of a woman who has made peace with a difficult decision and is not happy to have it disturbed. Damien, I need to come in. We talked about... This isn't about us, he said. Someone has a person in this building, connected to a threat against me that involves you. I need to tell you everything, and I need to do it inside, not in the hallway. She looked at his face for a moment. Whatever she found there, it was enough. She stepped back. He came in. She sat on the couch. He didn't sit. He stood near the window, not pacing, but not still, and he told her everything, in the order it had happened, and without editing it for her comfort. Falco, Caruso, Feld, the property management company, Vara on the night desk, the timeline, the endgame. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things he'd always respected about her and was finding, right now, almost unbearable. The quality of her attention, the way she took information in without deflecting it, let it land wherever it needed to land, and then sat with the weight of it before responding. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. The security upgrades you arranged, she said. You used a shell company. Yes. And Feld used the same channel, or a parallel one, to get his man inside at the same time. Yes. So your attempt to protect me quietly, without telling me, created the opening, yes. He looked at her directly. I know. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment, not to suppress emotion, her eyes were dry, but to hold something in place while she organized the rest of it. What happens now? She said. Vara will be gone from the building tonight. Geo is handling it through legitimate channels. I'm going to deal with Feld. I don't want details about how because I don't want you holding information that... No. She shook her head. I don't want that. I don't want to know and I don't want to not know. I want to be somewhere that isn't inside your world at all. I understand that. Do you? It wasn't quite a question. Because what I'm hearing is that even when you try to step back from it, even when you're doing everything right, the world you've built follows you home. It found me, Damien, not because I was careless, because I'm yours. That's the only reason. He said nothing, because there was nothing to say. She was completely correct. I need you to move me, she said. What? This building. I can't stay here. If Feld has a man in the building and you pull the man and Feld knows you know, then the next move is pressure somewhere else. And I'm not going to spend the last 10 weeks of my pregnancy waiting to find out what form that takes. Where would you go? I don't know yet. Somewhere he can't map to you. Somewhere there's no shell company, no scheduling system, no connection that someone who's been watching you for a year can trace. He thought about it for a moment. I have a property, off the books. It's not in any system connected to my name. It was purchased through a personal trust that predates my current operations. No one in my organization knows about it. I've never used it for business. She looked at him. Why do you have it? A pause. I bought it the year after we got married. I bought it because I knew if things ever went wrong in a way I couldn't control, I wanted somewhere I could take you that no one could find. The apartment was very quiet. You bought me a safe house, she said very slowly, when we were newlyweds. Yes. What does that say about the life you thought you were giving me? The question was not rhetorical. She actually wanted the answer. He could tell by the way she was looking at him, not with anger, not now, but with the kind of clear, exhausted assessment of a person who is revising everything they thought they knew about the architecture of their own life. It says I was never as sure of our safety as I let you believe, he said. It says I knew what I was and I married you anyway, and I told myself that love was protection enough, and I was wrong about that from the beginning. The silence after that was different from the silences before it. She stood up slowly, one hand on the arm of the couch for leverage, the way she'd been moving for the past month, careful, deliberate, aware of the weight she was carrying in every sense. She walked to the window and stood where he'd been standing a few minutes before, looking out at the city. I'll go, she said. To the property. I'll go. I'll arrange it tonight. But Damien. She didn't turn around. I need you to understand something. I'm not going because I trust you. I'm going because I trust that the threat is real, and I don't have another option right now. Those are different things. I know the difference, he said. And when this is over, when Feld is handled and I'm not looking over my shoulder, we are going to have a conversation that I've been putting off because I didn't have the energy for it, about whether I can build a life with a man whose name puts a target on the people he loves, whether love is enough when the math doesn't work. Yes, he said, we'll have it. I might not like where it ends. I know. She finally turned. Her face in the late afternoon light was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. Tired in the way that people get tired when they've been strong for too long without anyone offering to take the weight for a minute. Go arrange it, she said. Come back for me at 6. He nodded. He picked up his coat. He was at the door when her phone buzzed on the coffee table, and she glanced at it, and whatever she saw on the screen made her go very still. What? He said. She looked up. Something had shifted in her face. The exhaustion was still there, but underneath it now was something sharper. Something that looked almost like fear and almost like rage, and was precisely neither. She held the phone out to him. The message was from an unknown number. No greeting, no signature, just a photograph and a single line of text beneath it. The photograph was of Evelyn. Taken from above, from the security camera angle of a building lobby, she realized, looking at the timestamp in the corner. Last Tuesday night. She was in the lobby of Northwestern Memorial, coat over her arm, moving toward the exit. 7 months pregnant, alone, captured from an angle that made it unmistakably clear that whoever took this knew exactly where she was going to be and when. The text beneath it read, "He can't protect you from everything. Tell him to think about that before he makes his next move." Damien stared at the screen. His thumb was pressed against the edge of the phone, hard enough to whiten the skin. "He had someone at the hospital," Evelyn said. Her voice was almost completely level, which was more frightening than if it hadn't been. "While I was there, Tuesday night, he had someone there." "Yes," Damien said. "While you were in the waiting room." "Yes." She took the phone back from him. She looked at the photograph for a moment, at herself, small and unknowing in the lobby frame, moving through a building she'd entered because she was frightened and alone, surrounded by people she couldn't see who were watching for reasons she'd had no way of imagining. "Damien," she said, and her voice had dropped to something very quiet and very final, the voice of a woman who has arrived at the last room in a very long corridor. "Whatever you have been, whatever you've done and not done and promised and broken, whatever version of yourself you've been operating as for the past 8 months, that man cannot exist anymore. Do you understand me? Not because I'm asking you to change for us, because if that man continues to exist, our daughter will be born into a world where she is already someone's leverage, and I will not allow that. So whatever you need to do, whatever it costs you, whatever it costs the version of yourself you've been protecting, you end this. All of it. Or I will take her somewhere you will never find us, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure she never knows your name. She wasn't trembling. That was the part that reached into his chest and took hold of something structural. She was absolutely still, one hand on the side of her belly, eyes steady on his face, and she meant every syllable of it with the complete and immovable conviction of a woman who has already decided what she will do and is simply informing him of the terms. He looked at her for a long moment, and something in him, something that had been held in careful suspension for 20 years, the part of him that had always believed he could keep these two halves of his life from ever fully colliding, that power and love could coexist in the same man without destroying one or the other, broke, quietly, completely, and without the drama he might have expected, the way old ice breaks in spring. Not with a crack, but with a slow, irrevocable giving way. "I'll end it," he said. She held his gaze. "All of it." "All of it," he said. And standing there in the fading November light of an apartment he was no longer welcome to sleep in, Damien Vescari understood that he had just made the only promise in his life that he could not afford to break, and that keeping it was going to require him to dismantle, piece by piece, the empire he had spent his entire adult life constructing before the man who was using it against his family found one more way to remind him of the price of. He made 3 calls before he reached the lobby. The first was to Gio. "Pull everyone in, not the outer ring, the core 4, my office. 1 hour. The second was to Marcus Falco. "I need Feld's location, not his office, where he actually is at 9 o'clock tonight." The third was to his attorney, a man named Brennan, who had been handling the legal architecture of Damien's holdings for 11 years, and who answered the phone with the particular alertness of someone who has learned that late calls from this particular client mean the next several days of his life are going to be complicated. "I need the dissolution framework we discussed 2 years ago, the one for the legitimate portfolio. I need it active and executable by end of week." A pause. "Damien, that's a significant—" "I know what it is. Have it ready." He hung up and stepped out onto the street, and the November cold hit him like a flat hand, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing it in. The diesel and the lake smell, and the specific quality of Chicago air in the last weeks of autumn, which has an edge to it, a mineral sharpness, like the city itself is bracing for what's coming. He got in the car. "The office," he said. Gio had them assembled in 45 minutes, which was 8 minutes faster than Damien had asked for, which meant Gio had started making calls before Damien had even hung up, reading the tone of the instruction, the compression in it, and understanding that this was not the kind of meeting where you arrived at the 60-minute mark and hoped for the best. There were 4 of them around the table in the back office of the Michigan Avenue building. Gio, a man named Parrish who handled the operational side of the North Side properties, a woman named Delia who ran the financial intelligence, and whose presence in this room meant Damien was treating this as a full-spectrum problem, and a man named Ruiz who didn't have a formal title and didn't need one. Damien stood at the head of the table and did not sit. He put his phone on the table, face up, with the photograph Feld had sent still on the screen. He let them look at it. Nobody spoke for a moment. "He had someone at the hospital," Damien said, "the night my wife was admitted. He's had a man in her building for at least a week, planted through a staffing agency I inadvertently used as a cover. He's been running Caruso as a distraction and an intelligence feed simultaneously, and he moved from information gathering to active pressure in the last 72 hours. He looked around the table. "Which means he thinks he's ready." "What's he ready for?" Parrish said. "He wants the Halstead properties. He thinks if he makes my personal situation unstable enough, I'll deal, or I'll make mistakes." Damien paused. "He's been watching us long enough to know how I respond to threats against the business. He doesn't know how I respond to threats against my family, because I've never let it get this far before." "So what do we do?" Ruiz said. He was a man of very few words, and those were usually the right ones. "We don't deal and we don't make mistakes," Damien said. "We end it, tonight, if we can, this week at the latest." Delia leaned forward. She was 43 and had a mind that processed complex financial structures the way other people processed breathing, automatically, continuously, without apparent effort. Feld's exposure. I've been pulling threads on him since you called Geo. His operation is leveraged, significantly. He's got 3 active debt positions with institutions that would move against him fast if they had cause. If the Halstead play doesn't work for him, if he doesn't get what he's going for, he's not just walking away empty-handed, he's walking away with a problem. How big a problem? Damien said. Existential, if the timing is right. Then we make sure the timing is right. He looked at her. What do you need? 24 hours and access to 2 of the debt holders. You'll have both. And Feld himself, she said. We need him occupied. If he's watching his own back, he's not watching us build the structure around him. Marcus is getting me his location for tonight. Damien looked at Ruiz. That's yours. Ruiz nodded once. Not a confrontation, Damien said. I need him visible, occupied, and uncertain without knowing why. I need him looking at the wrong thing while Delia does what she does. Understood. And Caruso, Parrish said. Caruso is done feeding him information as of tonight. Geo. Already on it, Geo said. Damien looked around the table one more time. These were the people he trusted. The actual core of it. The 4 who had been with him long enough to have earned something real and whom he had, in different ways and over different years, tried to give something real back to. Looking at them now, in this room, he felt something he wasn't entirely prepared for. A specific weight. The weight of what he was about to ask them to help him end. There's something else, he said. After Feld, after this is resolved. He stopped, and in the stopping, the room went very quiet in a particular way, the way rooms go quiet when the person at the head of the table is about to say something that cannot be unsaid. I'm beginning the process of unwinding the operation, the full operation. The Halstead properties go legitimate, or they go. The other holdings, the ones that aren't clean, I'm closing them out. I've got Brennan working on the framework. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The fluorescent hum of the office filled the silence like water filling a space. It was Geo who spoke first, and when he did, his voice was careful and completely without judgment, which was exactly why Damien had trusted him for 12 years. Is this because of Evelyn? It's because of my daughter, Damien said. And yes, it's because of Evelyn. He looked at Geo directly. And it's because a man I underestimated got close enough to photograph my pregnant wife in a hospital lobby and send it to her phone, and I will not live inside a structure that makes that possible. The silence held for another moment. Then Delia said, okay, and opened her laptop. Parrish said, then let's do this clean. And Ruiz said nothing because Ruiz never said anything, but he uncrossed his arms and leaned forward over the table, and that was enough. Marcus came through at 8:47. Feld is at a place called the Verano Club on Walker. Private dining room, 2nd floor, dinner with 2 men I can't fully identify, but who look like money. He's been there since 7. How long will he stay? These dinners run late. He's a performer, loves the long table. A pause. Damien, what are you doing tonight? Making sure he doesn't have time to make his next move before mine lands. I'd ask you to be careful, but that's not really the relevant variable here. No, Damien agreed. It's not. He was in the car 15 minutes later, moving north on Michigan, the city sliding past in the wet dark. He was not going to the Verano Club. That was Ruiz's piece. What Damien was doing was something different and in many ways more dangerous. Not physically, but in the way that things are dangerous when they can't be undone. He was going to Caruso. Vincent Caruso lived in a 3-story brownstone in Lincoln Park that he'd purchased 12 years ago with money that had moved through 4 different shells before reaching anything resembling a clean account. He had a wife, 2 kids, a golden retriever that barked at the front window when cars slowed on the street. He had, by every external measure, the life of a successful civilian, and he had built that life on the understanding that the people he worked with would never bring their problems to his front door. Damien rang the bell at 9:22. The dog started barking before the sound finished. Through the frosted glass panel beside the door, Damien saw a light come on in the hallway, and then the shadow shape of a man moving cautiously toward the entrance, and then the pause. That specific pause when a person on the other side of a door is looking through the peephole and seeing something that their body understands before their mind catches up. The door opened on the chain, Caruso's eye in the gap. His face was pale in the way that people go pale when blood moves inward, toward the core, the body's ancient preparation for threat. Damien, take the chain off, Vincent. It's late. My kids are... Take the chain off. A beat. The chain came off. The door opened. Caruso was in a sweater and jeans, the off-duty costume of a man who'd been hoping the evening was finished. He was 51 years old, soft around the middle, with the eyes of someone who had always been slightly more afraid than he let on. He stepped back to let Damien in, and Damien came in and closed the door behind him. And the dog, big, yellow, completely ineffective as a deterrent, sniffed at Damien's coat and then retreated to the kitchen. The hallway was warm. There was a child's backpack on the floor near the stairs and a pair of small sneakers beside it. Damien looked at them for a moment. "Living room," he said. They went to the living room. Caruso sat on the edge of the couch. Damien stood. He did not take his coat off. "How long?" Damien said. "Damien, I don't know what..." "Vincent." He said the name the way you say something that's reached the end of its tolerance. "I know everything. The timeline, the calendar feeds, the scheduling manipulations, the Renata connection." He watched Caruso's face process the name and flinch. "And I know about the hospital. I know he had someone at Northwestern the night my wife was admitted, and I know you knew about it because you gave Feld the information about her medical situation that made targeting that location possible." Caruso's mouth opened, closed. "I have a pregnant wife," Damien said very quietly. "She was in a hospital alone and frightened, and someone was in that building watching her because you fed them the information to put him there." "It wasn't..." Caruso's voice cracked. "I didn't know he was going to... What did you think he was going to do with it?" The question sat in the room. Caruso looked at his own hands. He was shaking, finely, in the way that a man shakes when he's been holding something heavy for a long time and has just been asked to set it down in front of the person it was aimed at. "He had leverage on me," Caruso said, "from before you and I were ever, before any of this. He had things from 12 years ago that would have..." He stopped. "I couldn't say no to him. I couldn't. You could have come to me. You would have..." "I would have handled it," Damien said. "That was always the option you had. You chose the other one." Caruso said nothing. "Here's what happens now," Damien said. "You're going to give me everything. Every communication with Feld, every piece of information you passed, every instruction you received. In writing, documented, signed. Tonight. If I do that, Feld is going to have his own problems by morning. That's not your concern." Damien looked at him steadily. "Your concern is this room, right now, and the decision you make in the next 30 seconds. Caruso looked at the floor, then at the stairs where the sound of a television filtered down faintly from an upstairs bedroom. Some late-night show, a laugh track, the completely ordinary sound of a household that didn't know what was happening on its ground floor. He got up and went to the desk in the corner and opened the laptop. Damien was back in his car at 10:45 with a forwarded email chain spanning 9 months and a signed witness statement that Brennan could make useful in ways Caruso didn't need to fully understand. His phone buzzed. "Ruiz, done. He spent 2 hours at the table and left with a headache he doesn't understand yet." Translation: Ruiz had arranged for something. Damien didn't ask for specifics. To reach the 2 men at dinner with Feld, something that would make them nervous about their association with him, something that would require Feld's attention and energy to manage tonight and tomorrow morning instead of moving his next piece on the board. The headache Feld didn't understand yet was the beginning of Delia's structure closing around him from the financial side. He called Delia. "How are we?" "I've made contact with the first debt holder. They're interested. I need until noon tomorrow for the second." "You'll have it." "Damien?" Her voice shifted slightly, the professional register dropping a fraction. "This is going to work, but it's going to work because of the speed. If he figures out the financial angle before I finish the second contact..." "He won't," Damien said. "He's going to be busy." He hung up. He sat in the back of the car for a moment in the dark and quiet, and felt the shape of what the next 12 hours required. The sequencing of it, the careful ordering of pressures, the way each piece had to land in the right window for the next one to matter. He'd done this before, built these kinds of structures, moved these kinds of problems from threatening to resolved. He was good at it. He'd always been good at it. The difference now was what he was building it for. Not for the business, not for the portfolio, not for the maintenance of a power structure that had, he understood now with a clarity that would have been unavailable to him 2 weeks ago, been eating his actual life from the inside for years while he called it success. He was building it for a woman sitting in an apartment he was no longer welcome to sleep in, one hand on the side of her belly, trying to trust him enough to let him protect her, while simultaneously making clear that protection was not the same thing as forgiveness, and never would be. He was building it for a daughter who didn't have a name yet, who was going to be born into whatever world he made or failed to make between now and the moment she arrived. He pressed the intercom. "Take me back to the office." He worked through this night. Not alone. Gio was there until 3, Parrish until 2, Delia continuously through her laptop from wherever she was. But alone in the specific sense of the decisions, the ones that couldn't be delegated or distributed, the ones that required his signature or his word or his presence across a table from someone who needed to look him in the eye before they believed him. The dissolution framework that Brennan had prepared was 47 pages. He read all of it. He annotated it. He sent back 11 questions and got answers to 9 of them before morning. At 4:15 a.m., he stood at the window of the Michigan Avenue office and looked at the city below. The night shift of it, the garbage trucks, and the delivery vans, and the handful of yellow cabs working the streets with the particular patience of people who understand that the city never fully sleeps, just changes personnel. And he thought about what he was looking at. He'd built something in this city. There was no false modesty available to him about that. He had built something real and large and lasting, and it had cost him things he'd chosen to pay without fully understanding the invoice. Now the invoice was in his hands, all 47 pages of it, and the number at the bottom was his marriage and his daughter's safety, and the version of himself that he wanted to be when she was old enough to know the difference. It was not a difficult calculation. That was the part that surprised him. He'd expected it to be harder, expected some deep resistance, some version of himself fighting for the structure he'd spent 20 years erecting. Instead, there was just clarity. The cold, uncomfortable, completely unglamorous clarity of a man who has finally stopped lying to himself about what he values. His phone lit up at 5:58 a.m. Delia. Second contact confirmed. Structure is complete. It goes live when you say. He typed back, say. Anton Feld found out at 7:15 in the morning. Damien knew because Marcus called him at 7:22. He knows. He's moving. What does moving look like? Frantic. He's calling the debt holders directly. They're not picking up. He's calling Caruso. A pause. Caruso's not picking up either. No, Damien said. He's not. He's going to figure out the source. It's going to point to you. Yes. And then he's going to make a move. He's cornered, Damien. Cornered men. Make mistakes, Damien said. I know. That's what I need him to do. He was already in this car. He'd been in the car for 11 minutes, moving toward a location he'd identified at 2 in the morning as the most likely place Feld would go when the financial structure collapsed and he needed to regroup. A private office in a building on the West Loop that Feld used as a secondary base of operations. One that didn't appear in any official filing, but that Delia had surfaced through the same kind of patient thread pulling she'd been doing since yesterday afternoon. Marcus, he said, I need you at the West Loop address in 30 minutes. A pause. You're going to him. He's going to want to talk to me. I'm going to let him. It's not what you do. I know, but I need him to say what he thinks he has. I need him to make the play directly, so I know exactly what's left of it. And if he does more than talk, then I need you in the building, Damien said. A pause. 30 minutes, Marcus said, and hung up. The West Loop building was the kind of place that specialized in looking like nothing. A converted warehouse exterior, frosted glass on the ground floor, no signage beyond an address plate in brushed steel. The kind of building that absorbed a certain kind of business through pure anonymity. Damien went in through the main entrance at 8:04. He took the stairs. 4th floor, 3rd door on the left. Delia's information, which had been right about everything else and which he had chosen, at 8 in the morning after a sleepless night, to bet everything on being right about this. He knocked. A beat of silence. Then the sound of movement inside. Quick, not panicked, controlled but barely, and then the door opened. Feld was not what Damien had constructed in his mind over the past 18 hours. He'd built Feld from the shape of his moves, patient, strategic, willing to play a long game, and he'd expected something that looked like that. What he found was a man of about 60 with a neatly trimmed gray beard and the build of someone who had been athletic in his 40s and was still carrying the muscle memory of it, even if the muscle itself had softened. He was in a dress shirt, no jacket, collar button open. His eyes were sharp and calculating and furious, but the fury was managed, and the management was what Damien focused on, because managed fury in a man whose plan is collapsing is either discipline or desperation, and the difference between those two things determined everything about the next 10 minutes. "Viscari," Feld said. "Feld." Neither of them moved for a moment. The hallway was empty. Somewhere in the building, an elevator dinged and opened and closed. "You want to come in?" Feld said, and it was not quite a question. "I'm fine here," Damien said. A pause. Feld looked at him with the calculating assessment of a man running sums rapidly. "You took my people apart fast," he said. "The financial play, that was elegant. Whose idea?" "Mine." "I don't think so. You're a real estate and operations man. The debt structure was my idea," Damien said, "and my people's execution. I want to be clear about that because I want you to understand that what happened this morning wasn't an accident and it wasn't improvised. It was designed, with you specifically in mind." Feld's jaw was very tight. "What do you want?" "I want you to hear something, and then I want you to make a decision." Damien kept his voice level, his body still, his hands visible, everything calibrated to communicate the thing he needed Feld to believe, which was that this conversation was already over, and Feld was simply catching up to that fact. "The Halstead properties are not available to you. They were never going to be available to you. The play you ran, the manipulation, the pressure, the photograph, none of it was ever going to end with me at a table signing over what you wanted, because the one thing you didn't account for in all the surveillance and all the intelligence gathering was what I actually value. You looked at my wife as a weakness." He let that land. "She's not a weakness," Damien said. "She is the reason the math changed. She is the reason I burned my own schedule down and rebuilt it from scratch last night. She is the reason you are standing in a building this morning with no financial runway and no leverage and no Caruso and nowhere to go with this." Feld stared at him. "So here's the decision," Damien said. "You walk away from the North Side. From me, from my holdings, from anything that touches my family. You take what's left of your position and you go somewhere that isn't Chicago, and you don't come back to this particular table. And in exchange, I don't finish what Delia started this morning." "You're threatening me?" "I'm offering you an exit," Damien said. "Most people in your position right now don't get one. Consider the context." The hallway hummed with the building's ventilation system. Feld looked at him. Hard, long. The look of a man doing a final calculation that he already knows the answer to but needs to complete before he can accept it. "And if I don't walk," Feld said, "then by noon today you won't have the resources to do anything else." Another beat. Feld's hand, Damien noticed, was on the door frame. Not gripping it, just resting there, but resting with a pressure that whitened the knuckles slightly. The tell of a man holding himself in place through will. "I want your word," Feld said, "that this ends here. That there's no—" "You don't get my word," Damien said. You get my interest. I have no interest in you if you're not in my city. That's not the same as a promise, and I'm not going to pretend it is. But it's the truth. And the truth is worth more to you right now than any word I could give." Feld looked at him for a long moment. Then he stepped back from the doorframe. "I need 48 hours, he said, "to move the remaining positions." "You have 24, Damien said. "Delia will be watching the accounts." He turned and walked back to the stairwell, and he was 3 steps down when Feld's voice came from the doorway behind him. Not loud, almost conversational, the voice of a man who's lost and knows it, and needs to say one more thing anyway. "You're dismantling yourself to protect them. The legitimate holdings, the operation. I heard what you're doing. You're burning it all down." Damien stopped on the stairs. He didn't turn around. "The people who built empires like yours," Feld continued, "don't usually survive the burning." A pause. "I'm not building an empire anymore," Damien said. He kept walking. He was outside on the sidewalk, the cold morning air hitting him full in the face, when his phone rang. Not Gio, not Delia, not Marcus. Dr. Miriam Howell. He picked up before the second ring was finished, and the quality of her voice in the first syllable, controlled, direct, the voice of someone who has been managing critical situations for 20 years and has learned to front-load the information before the person on the other end of the line has time to catastrophize. Told him everything and nothing simultaneously. Damien, Evelyn is back at Northwestern. She came in 40 minutes ago. The contractions are back and they're not slowing down this time. He was already moving toward the car. Is she? She's stable. The baby's heartbeat is strong, but we're at 32 weeks and the pattern has changed. I need you to understand. A fraction of a pause. This may be the night. The car door was open. He was inside. The city blurred past the window as the driver pulled into traffic without being told where. Because Gio had already called ahead. Because Gio was always 3 steps ahead on the things that mattered. And the only thing Damien could hear above the noise of the engine and the traffic and the compressed roar of everything that had happened in the past 12 hours was his own heartbeat. Irregular for the first time he could remember, knocking against the inside of his ribs like something that wanted out. I'm on my way, he said. She asked me not to call you, Dr. Howell said. He closed his eyes for 1 second. I know. I called you anyway, she said. Because she's frightened and she's alone and whatever is between the two of you, she should not be alone right now. Tell her I'm coming, he said. Tell her she can send me away when I get there. But I'm coming. He hung up and leaned forward and said to the driver very quietly, as fast as you can. And the car accelerated into the November morning, and Damien Vescari sat back and felt the full weight of everything. The night, the decisions, the thing with Feld, the 47 pages, the empire he was dismantling. The photograph of his wife in a hospital lobby, felt it all at once, not as separate pieces, but as a single accumulated mass. And underneath all of it, underneath the exhaustion and the adrenaline and the specific texture of a man who has been operating at maximum capacity for 20 hours without sleep, was something that he would not have known how to name even 2 weeks ago, but that he recognized now with a certainty that nothing in the past 12 hours had been able to touch. The only thing he had ever actually been afraid of losing was already in a hospital bed, and he was still 20 minutes away. The traffic light ahead went red. The driver looked at him in the rear view. Go, Damien said. He ran the last 40 feet, not because the elevator was slow. It wasn't, but because when the doors opened on the maternity floor, and he heard, from somewhere down the corridor, a sound that he recognized as Evelyn's voice, even though he couldn't make out the words. His body made the decision before his mind finished forming it, and he was moving, coat still on, past the nurse's station where someone called after him and he didn't stop, past a cart of equipment parked against the wall, past a room with its door open where a television was on, until he found the right door and pushed through it. She was in the bed. Monitors attached, the same pale blue gown as before, her hair loose this time instead of pulled back. She'd come in fast, no preparation, the kind of arrival that doesn't allow for the small dignities. Dr. Howell was on her left side, checking something on the monitor screen. Kara was on her right, standing close with both hands wrapped around one of Evelyn's, and Kara looked up when Damien came in with an expression that was complicated in the specific way that only the expressions of people who love someone on both sides of a conflict can be complicated. Evelyn looked at him. She did not tell him to leave. That was the first thing. That was the thing he held on to. How long? He said, directing it at Dr. Howell, because that was the one question he needed answered before anything else. Contractions are 4 minutes apart and holding, Dr. Howell said. We're 32 weeks and 2 days. The baby's presentation is good, heartbeat is strong, but the labor pattern is established, and I don't think we're stopping it this time. She looked at him with the directness he'd come to understand was her default mode. No cushioning, no performance of reassurance, just information and what it meant. We're going to try to slow it, but you should both be prepared for the possibility that your daughter is coming tonight. She's early, Evelyn said, and her voice had a thinness to it that was not weakness but effort. The voice of someone managing a physical process that is not asking for her input. 8 weeks early. 32 weeks is a different world than it was 20 years ago, Dr. Howell said. I need you to hold on to that. Evelyn's jaw was tight. Her eyes went to the window. The same reflex he'd noticed in the hospital 5 days ago, looking outward when the inward was too much, and then came back, and they landed on Damien, and she looked at him for a long moment without speaking, the two of them bracketed by the beeping of the monitors and Kara's careful stillness and the particular antiseptic quiet of a room where something irreversible is building. "Miriam called you," she said. "Yes, I told her not to." "I know." A contraction moved through her. He could see it in the set of her shoulders, the way her free hand found the bed rail and gripped, the held breath and the slow release of it through her teeth. And he crossed the room without deciding to, and stood at the foot of the bed, not touching her, not taking the space that was Kara's to give, just present, just there, in the room, which was what he had promised and the only thing he had a right to offer. When it passed, she opened her eyes and looked at him again. "Sit down," she said. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't." "Sit down anyway." He pulled the chair from the corner and sat at the side of the bed, not close enough to crowd, and Kara looked at him over Evelyn's head with an expression that said, "I'm watching you, not because I hate you, because she matters more than your comfort." He held her gaze and nodded slightly, and Kara looked away, and that was the end of that negotiation. The next 2 hours were the longest of his life. Not because of the waiting, he'd waited in worse rooms for worse outcomes, but because of the quality of the proximity. He was here, and she knew he was here, and neither of them was pretending that his presence resolved anything or that her allowing it meant what it didn't mean. They existed, for those 2 hours, in a space that had no precedent in their marriage, completely honest, completely stripped of performance, two people in a room with a crisis that didn't care about either of their feelings and required them, simply, to be present inside it together. Dr. Howell came and went. A specialist joined them briefly, a neonatologist named Park, a compact, precise man who explained, clearly and without drama, what a 32-week delivery looked like in practice, what interventions were available, what the first hours would require. Evelyn listened to all of it with her full attention, asking 3 specific questions about lung development, about NICU protocols, about the first contact after delivery, and the steadiness with which she took in the answers made something move in Damien's chest that was not quite awe, but was in its neighborhood. She had always been braver than him. He'd known it from the beginning and spent years not fully sitting with the knowledge. Sitting with it now, in this room, felt like a form of penance that was also a privilege. At some point, Kara left to get coffee and did not come back quickly, which Damien understood was deliberate, and which left him and Evelyn alone in the room with the monitors and the November dark beyond the window. "Felled," Evelyn said. "Is it done?" He looked at her. "How do you know about, Kara?" she said. "Gio called Kara when he couldn't reach you this morning. She told me." He took that in. "It's done. He's out of the city by tomorrow. Delia's watching the accounts." "And Caruso?" "Handled." She was quiet for a moment, her hand moving in a slow circle on the side of her belly. The unconscious gesture he'd been watching for months. The one that meant she was talking to the baby in the private language that existed between them before anyone else got access. And the other thing, the dissolution. Brennan has the framework. It takes time, months, probably closer to a year to do it clean, but it's in motion. "You're really doing it?" "Yes. Not because I asked you to." "Not only because you asked me to," he looked at her steadily, "because a man sent a photograph of you to your own phone to make a point about my vulnerabilities. And I looked at that photograph and I understood that I had built a life that produced that moment. Not just enabled it, produced it. And I don't want to be the architect of that anymore." Evelyn looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at him. "What does that leave?" she said. "When it's done, what does Damien Viscari do?" The legitimate holdings are real businesses. They employ people. They can be run without the other structure supporting them. It just takes restructuring, different capital sources, a different operational model. He paused. "And there are things I'm good at that don't require the rest of it. Negotiation, problem solving, reading rooms, and people." A slight pause. "I've been told I'm occasionally effective at those things." The corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But the ghost of one. The memory of the reflex. "Occasionally," she said, "another contraction. This one longer." She gripped the rail and breathed through it with her eyes closed, and Damien sat very still and watched her face, the focused inward quality of it, the way she moved through the pain with a kind of grim competence that had nothing to do with enjoying it and everything to do with having decided she was going to do this. And when it passed and her eyes opened, he said, "I'm sorry." She looked at him. "Not as a request," he said. "Not as a negotiation. I'm telling you because you deserve to hear it stated plainly. And I've been saying it with actions for 2 weeks, because I was afraid that saying it directly would sound like what it isn't, but it needs to be said directly. I am sorry. For Renata, for the 8 months, for every night I wasn't there and every call I didn't take, and every version of you managing things alone that I allowed to happen because it was easier than being present." He stopped. "And I'm sorry for who I built myself into, before I understood what it was costing." What? The room was very quiet. "I know," Evelyn said, and then, "That's not forgiveness." "I know that too." "I don't know what it is yet," she said. "I've been trying to figure that out for 2 weeks, and I keep not arriving anywhere clean. I'm angry, and I'm tired, and I'm scared about tonight, and I'm—" She stopped. Her hand went still on her belly. "I missed you," she said, and the 3 words came out flat and undecorated and clearly against her better judgment, the kind of admission that a person makes when they're too exhausted to keep it contained. "That's the part I hate. I'm furious at you, and I missed you, and those 2 things keep existing in the same place, and I can't resolve them." "You don't have to resolve them tonight," he said. "No," she said. "Tonight I have other things to do." Their daughter was born at 2:17 in the morning. The delivery was hard, harder than the numbers had suggested, harder than Dr. Howell's prepared calm had prepared either of them for. There was a period of 40 minutes, somewhere in the final stretch, where the word emergency was not spoken aloud but was present in the room in the way that a specific quality of urgency among medical professionals communicates what they're choosing not to say. Damien stood at the head of the bed. Evelyn had not told him to move, and he had not moved, and at some point in the previous hour, her hand had found his arm and stayed there, not grasping, just contact. The kind of contact that means, "You're here, that's what this is." And he watched Dr. Howell's face and the faces of the nurses, and he did what he had not done in 20 years of managing crises. He held completely still and let someone else handle it. He could not fix this. There was no call to make, no leverage to apply, no structure to build around this particular problem. His wife's body and his daughter's life were in a room with people whose competence he had to simply trust, and the only thing he could give Evelyn in this moment was his presence, unmanaged, unperforming, just there. So he stayed there, and at 2:17, after a sound from Evelyn that he would carry in his body for the rest of his life, not a scream, something rawer than that, something that came from a place below language. There was another sound, smaller and higher and unmistakably, furiously alive, and Dr. Howell said, "She's here," in a voice that had something different in it than its usual register, something that sounded like relief shaped into professionalism, and the room changed. He felt it change, the quality of the air, the quality of the light, the quality of every molecule in the space rearranging itself around the new fact of her. He looked at Evelyn first. Her face, in the moment after, was the face of someone who has come through something enormous and is not yet sure what the other side looks like, but is present in it completely. Exhausted and shaking slightly, and absolutely, entirely alive in a way that she hadn't been 20 minutes ago. "Is she—" Evelyn started. "She's breathing," Dr. Howell said. "She's small, but she's breathing and she's angry about it, which is exactly what we want." As if to confirm this, the baby cried again, a thin, insistent, completely unambiguous sound that said, "I am here. I am here, and I am not done." They brought her to Evelyn first. That was right. That was the only order that made sense. Damien watched his wife receive their daughter, watched the way Evelyn's arms adjusted instinctively to the weight of her, the way her face changed when the baby was placed on her chest, a change that was beyond description and that he was going to spend the rest of his life trying to find the right words for and probably failing. "Hey," Evelyn said very softly to the small, furious creature on her chest. "Hey, I know. The baby's crying slowed. Not stopped, She was too new and too loud for stopped, but slowed, as if the voice was registering, as if something in the architecture of the world she'd just been pushed into was recognizable. After a while, he didn't know how long, time had stopped functioning in any recognizable way, Evelyn looked up at him. She held out the baby. He took her. She was so small that the word small was inadequate. She was a concentrated thing, dense with life in a way that seemed to contradict her size. A tight fist of a person who had arrived 8 weeks ahead of schedule and with an opinion about it. She was wrapped in a blanket the color of old cream. Her eyes were shut. Her face was red and working, processing the indignity of the world, and her hand, he could see one hand at the edge of the blanket, impossibly small, fingers spread slightly, was perfect. He held her for a long time without speaking, because there were no words in any language he knew for what was happening in his chest, which was not breaking, but the opposite of breaking, which was the sound of something that had been broken for a very long time, finding its original shape, piece by piece, in the dark. She needs a name, Evelyn said quietly. They had not agreed on a name. They had discussed names, a list months ago in the kitchen over dinner, before everything. But nothing had been settled, and the list had sat in a drawer unchecked while the rest of the year happened around it. You choose, he said. We both choose, she said. That's how it works. He looked at his daughter's face. Nell, he said. He hadn't planned it. It came from somewhere he didn't have a map to. Eleanor, if she wants something formal later, Nell. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, then, Nell Ashcroft Viscari. Yes, he said. Both names, she said. She gets to decide what to do with them later. Yes. Nell made a small sound against his chest. Not crying, something different. An exhalation, almost of agreement. And Damien looked down at her and felt the full weight of the past 3 months. The night in the kitchen, the hospital waiting room, the plastic chair, the text from Falco, the 47-page document, the 40 feet he'd run down a hospital corridor 20 hours ago. Felt all of it at once. Not as pain, not anymore, but as the material cost of arriving here, in this room, holding this person, and understanding for the first time with his whole body, and not just his mind, what he'd been risking by being less than he should have been. He handed Nell back to Evelyn, carefully, with both hands. Then he sat back down in the chair beside the bed, and for a long time neither of them said anything. Kara came back at some point and cried quietly in the doorway, and was not embarrassed about it. Dr. Howell checked in at intervals, and was satisfied with what she found. The neonatologist took Nell for a full assessment and returned her with the cautious optimism of a man whose caution was earned and whose optimism was real. She's going to need monitoring and time, but she's strong. She came in fighting. She gets that from her mother, Damien said. Dr. Park looked at him. Probably, he said, and left. Around 4 in the morning, when Kara had fallen asleep in the recliner in the corner, and Nell was in the warming bassinet beside the bed, and the monitors had settled into a quieter rhythm, Evelyn said, There are conditions. Damien looked at her. She was propped up against the pillows, pale and worn, and more present than anyone he'd ever seen. For what comes next, she said. If there is a what comes next. I'm not saying there is. I'm not ready to say that. But if there is, there are conditions. Tell me. The therapy continues, not as a gesture, not for a month, and then it quietly stops. It continues, and I'm allowed to know it's continuing, not because I'm checking up on you, but because it matters to me that it's real. Yes. The dissolution of the other operation happens on the timeline Brennan set. I want to see the framework. I want to understand what's being wound down and how. I'm not going to manage it. It's not my area, and I don't want it to be. But I'm not going to be kept outside of information about my own life again. Ever. Yes, and Renata. Evelyn's voice didn't change when she said the name. Didn't harden, didn't crack, stayed level, which was somehow more difficult to hear than either of those alternatives would have been. I don't want to discuss her, I don't want details, and I don't want a reconstruction of the timeline, and I don't want you to explain her to me. What I want is for you to understand, actually understand, not just agree to, that what she did was made possible by what you did, That she found the gap because you built the gap, and that closing it now doesn't erase the fact that it existed. I understand that, he said. I need you to understand it every day, she said. Not as punishment, as truth. Because the day you stop understanding it is the day you start being capable of it again. Yes, he said, and meant it in a way that the word had not carried in a long time. Not as agreement, not as compliance, but as the sound of a man who has located something real and is holding it with both hands. Evelyn looked at the bassinet where Nell was sleeping. The small, even motion of her chest, the fist curled against her cheek, the extraordinary fact of her simply being there and breathing. I'm not ready to say I forgive you, Evelyn said. I might get there. I don't know. But I'm also not ready to say I'm done. She paused. I've been trying to figure out which of those is more true for 2 weeks, and what I keep arriving at is that both of them are true at the same time, and that sitting inside both things being true simultaneously, is the actual work. Not arriving somewhere clean and decided, just living inside the complicated thing without running from it. Is that something you can do? He said. I don't know, she said. I know I'm going to try. She looked at him. The question is whether you can do it, because trying, for you, has historically looked like managing. And I don't need to be managed. I need a partner. I know the difference now, he said. I didn't before. I do now. How? He looked at Nell. Because management is what you do when you're afraid of what happens if you stop controlling the outcome. And I sat in a room tonight and couldn't control anything, and the outcome was, he stopped, looked at his daughter's sleeping face. She has your jaw, he said quietly. Already. 8 hours old, and she has your jaw. Evelyn looked at Nell for a moment, and the corners of her eyes tightened in a way that was not pain and not quite joy, but the territory between them where the realest things tend to live. She has your hands, she said. Unfortunately, the room was very quiet. Outside the window, the first gray suggestion of morning was beginning at the edge of the Chicago sky. Not light yet, just the absence of full dark, the city exhaling after a night that had cost everyone in this room something they weren't going to get back. I'm going to ask you something, Damien said. You can say no. Ask? Can I stay? I'm not asking to go home. I'm not asking for anything except to be in this room while she sleeps. I'll be in the chair. I won't ask for anything else tonight. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. The monitors beeped. Nell's small chest rose and fell. The chair, Evelyn said, and when I wake up and ask you to go, you go. Yes. Without argument. Yes. She settled back against the pillows and closed her eyes, and Damien pulled the chair a few inches closer to the bassinet and sat down and looked at his daughter, and the room went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when everyone in them has finally stopped fighting for the night. He didn't sleep. He hadn't expected to. He sat in the chair and watched Nell breathe and watched the window lighten by degrees, and thought about the 47 pages and the year it was going to take to execute them, and the therapy appointments and the work of being a different kind of man than the one he'd been building for 20 years. He thought about Evelyn's conditions, not as terms, not as restrictions, but as what they actually were, the architecture of a woman who had been hurt and was not pretending otherwise, and was offering him the chance, anyway, to build something honest inside the wreckage. He thought about what that chance cost her, and how little he deserved it, and how thoroughly he intended to deserve it eventually. Around 6 a.m., Nell made a sound. Not crying, just a small vocalization, the sound of a person reminding the room that she was present, and Damien leaned forward in the chair and said, very quietly, so as not to wake Evelyn, "I'm here." Nell settled. He sat back. The city outside the window was fully gray now, the particular flat light of a Chicago morning that has come out the other side of something. Storm, winter, the long night of a year that had taken more than it gave. The lake was out there somewhere past the buildings, indifferent as always to what human beings were doing on its shore, enormous and cold and entirely itself. Damien Vescari, who had spent 20 years building a structure designed to make him untouchable, sat in a plastic chair in a maternity ward and understood that the most dangerous thing he had ever done, the thing that required more courage than any room he had walked into, any deal he had made, any problem he had managed from behind the glass, was this: staying. Not running the situation, not fixing it, not managing the outcome, just staying. When Evelyn woke at 7, she looked at him first. He didn't speak. He waited. She looked at Nell, checked her the way new mothers do. The instinctive inventory, all present, all accounted for. And then she looked back at him. "Coffee," she said. "There's a machine down the hall." He stood. "Black," she said. "You know how I take it." "I know," he said. He went and got the coffee, and he came back and he gave it to her, and she took it, and she didn't tell him to leave. And that was not forgiveness, and it was not a resolution, and it was not the end of the long, careful, daily work of earning back the trust of a woman who had every right to withhold it. But it was a cup of coffee in a hospital room at 7 in the morning with their daughter sleeping between them, and the gray Chicago light coming through the window, and both of them still in the room. It was the first day of the rest of the work. It was enough.